Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being well informed. Have you ever felt like you're just caught in this constant flood of communication? Ping after ping, your inbox looks like a complete mess. Endless meetings that just seem to go nowhere. It's that feeling, right? Talking a lot, but not really getting any clearer or making progress. We've definitely felt it. And this deep dive is all about tackling that exact feeling head on. Because in today's, super fast-paced work world, the real point of good communication often gets lost. It ends up being more chaos than clarity. So our goal for you today is to show how really impactful communication, well, it isn't about how much you say. It's much more about the structure, the purpose, the rhythm underneath it all. We've gathered insights from quite a few sources, including some really fascinating wisdom from ancient texts, like biblical principles.
That's such a crucial point. A lot of organizations, they just mistake communication volume for actual effectiveness. And this leads to routines, lots of activity, but very few real outcomes. So today, we'll unpack some, transformative truths about crafting communication rhythms that are intentional. Rhythms that actually foster understanding and drive results that matter. It's about synchronizing efforts using well-defined frameworks, not just drowning in this ocean of messages we all seem to face.
Yeah, exactly. And what I find really compelling about the sources for this dive is how we're layering in that timeless wisdom. Those biblical principles aren't just abstract ideas. They give us really actionable strategies. This isn't just theory. We're talking practical ways you can genuinely transform your interactions every day, from team meetings right down to your one-on-ones.
Right. Our core mission here is to help you shift. Shift from that place where more communication actually becomes the enemy of meaning, to move towards a space of real clarity, real connection. It's about cultivating communication that's, let's say, purpose-driven, intentional, and really rooted in understanding what matters most.
Okay, so let's start by unpacking this modern issue. The paradox of hyperconnectivity. We're in this era where, we often think speed equals significance, right? And that talking more often means we're being more effective. But think about it. There's this striking statistic out there. Something like 67% of employees feel completely overwhelmed by digital noise. That's huge.
Yeah.
And it's a real risk, not just for burnout, which is serious enough,
Absolutely.
but also for missing those critical insights that get buried under all the chatter. It's like everyone's talking, but is anyone really listening?
What's fascinating is that this isn't an entirely new problem, even with all our digital tools. If you look back at ancient wisdom, like the biblical story of the Tower of Babel in Genesis, it's a really powerful warning. You have this situation where everyone shared a language, yes, but their efforts were all about their own ambition. It wasn't aligned around a unifying vision, a shared purpose beyond themselves. And the result: confusion, noise without purpose, and eventually it all just fell apart. Disintegration. It really highlights a timeless truth, doesn't it? Shared language without a shared higher purpose. That often leads straight to noise, not progress.
So Babel's the warning sign. Let's flip that and explore a contrast, a different model from those same ancient texts. You could call it a kind of blueprint for masterful communication. Think about the creation story in Genesis 1. You hear, "And God said," repeated, but with this deliberate rhythm, this cadence, creation unfolds in a clear pattern. There's a proclamation, then fulfillment, then reflection, and this is key, a pause. That sequence teaches us something powerful. Words have creative force, yes, but they need these measured intervals.
Yeah.
Space for reflection, for intention. It's even reflected in the language itself, isn't it? That Hebrew word, dabar.
Yes, dabar. It means both word and thing, or event.
Right. Showing that deep link between speech and actual reality.
Exactly. And the insight there is that real creativity, real order, it doesn't come from rushing. This source shows communication unfolding in time, with wisdom, with structure. It models this effective flow, not an overwhelming flood. So the key takeaway: pacing isn't some kind of luxury. It's actually fundamental to making an impact with your communication.
That idea of intentional pacing, it really clicks. And then you look at, say, the book of Proverbs. So much wisdom there. Okay, let's unpack this one. "With many words comes no lack of sin, but whoever restrains his lips is prudent."
Oh.
And it goes even further. "Even a fool who keeps silent is considered wise."
Ooh.
Wow. That really makes you stop and think about our modern habit of needing to fill every single silence, doesn't it?
It raises a big question for all of us, really. Where does genuine insight actually come from? And often it emerges in those silent spaces, those pauses. There's another proverb to answer before listening, and that is folly and shame. That powerfully highlights listening, not just as, being polite, but as a core communication rhythm. It's a discipline, the distilled insight here. Strategic listening. And even, yes, strategic silence can actually be your most powerful communication tools.
Okay, now here's where, for me, it gets really insightful. If we look at Jesus in the Gospels, what a remarkable model for communication. His use of silence is just striking. Think about it, nearly 30 years, mostly out of the public eye. Or how he regularly withdrew to be alone.
Right, purposeful withdrawal.
Exactly. And his patient questions, his attentive presence, like that conversation at the well in John's Gospel, or even his deliberate delays, like with Lazarus. It wasn't about speed. It all suggests that effective communication, maybe kingdom communication, isn't about saturation. It's about synchronization, timing. He offered truth like a seed to be planted, not a flood to drown people in.
And from a leadership viewpoint, this suggests something quite profound. Sometimes a well-timed pause can be far more powerful than jumping in with an immediate reply. It's about practicing that discipline of, let's call it, delayed communication. Thinking, maybe praying, before speaking. Seeking the right time for the message just as much as focusing on the message content itself. The principle is clear. True impact often comes from measured, intentional delivery, not just blurting things out.
And building on that intentionality structure, we see another great example in the Apostle Paul's letters. These ancient letters, they were foundational communications for a whole movement, right?
Absolutely foundational.
And they follow these clear structured patterns, a greeting, then thanksgiving, teaching, practical advice, personal notes, a blessing at the end. And Paul consistently used transition words, therefore, so then finally, to guide the reader.
It really shows the power of crafting messages with clear entry points, a logical flow, and a definite conclusion. It honors the audience. It respects their need for orientation, for mental rest stops, if you will. And Paul's advice in Colossians, let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt.
Yeah.
That's not just about being nice. It's about timing, discernment, adding real value, real substance. The salt. It connects right back to his instruction in Corinthians. Let all things be done decently and in order. So the core takeaway, structure isn't limiting, it's actually clarifying. And it's respectful to your audience.
Okay, so let's contrast that structured wisdom with the chaos we talked about earlier from Babel. We can look at the early church community described in the book of Acts. They're described as devoting themselves to specific things, the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer.
Yes, and what's really compelling there is that this wasn't just random chatter, it wasn't just hanging out. It was communication based on a shared purpose, on foundational principles, covenantal communication, you might say. It was intentionally structured, spiritually ordered, and look at the outcome described. Awe, generosity, kindness, growth.
Powerful outcomes.
Very. It gives us this clear blueprint for achieving clarity and unity when communication is rooted in shared commitments, not just individual competition or ambition. The principle seems to be shared purpose elevates collective communication.
Okay, so this is all fascinating ancient wisdom. But what does it mean for you listening right now? How can you actually apply these timeless principles to your daily life, your leadership, whatever your context? We've kind of distilled them into a three-part framework. Let's call it purposeful communication rhythms. First, the rhythm of time. Simple, but hard. Don't rush. Actively build in margin between messages. Plan intentional pauses for feedback, for reflection, for making discerning choices. Second, the rhythm of purpose. Always get clear on the goal. Is this communication for instruction, encouragement, correction, collaboration? Align every message with your mission and be ruthless about avoiding communication that just fills space but drains meaning. You all get those emails, right?
Oh, absolutely. Pointless communication.
Yeah. And third, the rhythm of relationship. This means tailoring your tone and timing to who you're talking to. Consider their emotional state, their professional context, maybe even cultural nuances. Yeah. And crucially, listen. Listen hard before you speak. And keep listening even after you've said your piece.
Absolutely. And this framework also embraces the strategic use of silence, allowing those pauses in decision-making, letting silence create the space where wisdom can actually surface. And we also need to think consciously about our channels, synchronous versus asynchronous.
Right, the real-time versus delayed thing.
Exactly. Synchronous, real-time communication like a meeting or a call that's often best for resolving conflict, casting a vision, quick collaboration where back and forth is key. It emphasizes presence, nuance, that human connection. Whereas asynchronous or delayed communication email, shared docs, messages that's ideal for disseminating information, especially across time zones, or for strategic thinking, reflection where people need time to digest and respond thoughtfully.
That distinction is so practical. And for you, our listener, maybe think of this as a kind of communicative intent filter.
Hmm.
Before you dash off that email or schedule that meeting, ask yourself a few questions. Like, is relational trust a big factor here? Or is this issue complex but maybe not super urgent? Is this a sensitive conversation? Is this just for reference, or is it a direct instruction? Would this message really benefit from a personal, maybe empathetic tone? Is it feedback we're giving, or are we brainstorming ideas? Answering those helps you choose the right path, the right channel, consciously. Let's also talk about some specific frameworks for flourishing communication. Rhythms that kind of embody this wisdom. Think about things like weekly team check-ins, but focused on reflection and alignment with the mission, not just listing tasks.
Right, beyond just the metrics.
Exactly. Or monthly strategic reviews, stepping back for discernment beyond the day-to-day firefighting, allowing leaders to see the bigger picture, make corrections, maybe quarterly planning sessions for commissioning big projects, reinforcing commitment, framing goals as like responsible stewardship.
Stewardship, yes.
Good word. And regular 1.1s, seeing those not just as schedule checks, but as a core leadership duty. For nurturing growth, asking about the person, not just the project list, and even small things, like starting meetings with a centering question or a moment of silence, alternating presentation with real open dialogue. Using that sandwich approach for feedback. Affirm, critique constructively, affirm again.
And what's really compelling is how these modern frameworks echo ancient principles, like those 50-plus one another commands you find in the New Testament. They form this comprehensive framework for relational communication. It's rooted in this idea of interdependence, mutual support. So love one another. Maybe that translates practically into creating tech-free zones for real connection.
Makes sense.
And encourage one another. That could look like building structured affirmations into team meetings, making it normal, forgive one another, absolutely critical for healthy conflict resolution, and bear one another's burdens. That's about consciously creating space for vulnerability, for supporting each other when things get tough.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting, connecting the old and new. Modern agile practices, like the Scrum stand-up, used everywhere in tech and beyond. They seem like a secular echo of this ancient wisdom. You know those three questions: what did I do yesterday? What will I do today? And what impediments are in my way?
Exactly. And if you map those back to the broader principles we've discussed, what did I do yesterday? Well, that lines up with reflective stewardship, right? Accounting for your actions. You see that theme in texts from Romans or Matthew. What will I do today? That's pure intentionality, planning ahead. Think Proverbs. And what impediments? That connects directly to bear one another's burdens. It's an invitation for the team to help clear obstacles. And the key is brevity, isn't it? Let your words be few, as Ecclesiastes says.
Yeah. Stand-ups are meant to be short.
Right. They foster community action over siloed work, very much like that early church fellowship described in Acts, concise communication driving collective progress.
Okay, but here comes the crucial warning. A potential pitfall for all of us. It's the danger of form without function. When our meetings, our check-ins, any communication rhythm really, when they become just rituals without life. It reminds me of those ancient critiques, like in Isaiah, where the outward rituals were precise, but the inward meaning, the heart, was missing.
That raises a really important diagnostic question. What are the symptoms of these dysfunctional rhythms? Like bad meetings? Well, no clear agenda is a big one. Passive participation, people just zoning out, a consistent lack of clear outcomes or decisions, and just defaulting to the meeting because it's Tuesday at 10. Ritualism.
Yeah, we've all been in those.
And it's not just inefficient, it can actually be quite dehumanizing. It leads to cynicism, burnout. It often reflects a kind of misplaced theology of time and productivity, you could say. Like Psalm 127 warns, effort without purpose can be futile.
So how do we fight that? How do we recover the function? Get beyond just going through the motions. First, start every single communication rhythm with a clear why. What is the specific purpose? Second, establish living agendas. Agendas that are flexible, adaptive, focused on outcomes, not just a static list of topics. Third, evaluate your rhythms regularly and prune ruthlessly, to use that metaphor from John's Gospel. Get rid of meetings or channels that just aren't bearing fruit anymore.
Be honest about it.
Exactly. And finally, always restore the relational center. Remember that principle from 1 Corinthians. Let all that you do be done in love. Focus on the people.
And here's a very practical tool you can use starting tomorrow. Consider doing a communication audit. It's a simple reflection exercise. List your main communication channels, meetings, emails, Slack, whatever. Note their frequency. State their intended purpose. Then, honestly, rate their effectiveness, maybe 1 to 5. And finally, identify specific improvements needed. Think of it as an organizational examen, a moment for strategic discernment, like 2 Corinthians suggests, and for creating practical order within your teams, echoing that principle from 1 Corinthians again.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's bring it back to where we started. That core challenge. Moving beyond just the sheer noise, the digital saturation we all feel, towards cultivating a true kingdom rhythm in our communication, a pattern that reflects a more thoughtful, intentional approach-wise, timely, purposeful, and aimed at redemptive, positive outcomes.
Exactly. And this isn't necessarily about doing less, but about doing what truly matters with much greater intention. It's about recovering maybe the sacred art of structured clarity, where every word has weight and every message serves a clear mission.
And here's a final thought for you to reflect on. These frameworks, especially when grounded in timeless wisdom, they don't just clarify communication, they actually cultivate communion, deeper connection. And isn't that what we as humans are ultimately built for in our work and lives together?
So the challenge to you is this. Which tower are you building with your words, your meetings, your emails? Is it a tower of Babel, adding to the noise and confusion? Or is it more like that spirit-led structure of the early community in Acts, purposeful, ordered, life-giving? Our encouragement. Speak less, perhaps, but mean more. Speak with rhythm, not in a constant rush. Speak with heaven, with purpose in mind.
Take these insights. Think about how you could apply even one of them this week in your own life, your own leadership. Let's work towards transforming our communication from just static and noise to a clear signal, from chaos to clarity.